If Oregon plays the way they're capable in the lines of scrimmage Saturday against the Bruins at the Rose Bowl, yeah, it might get ugly.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Locked On College Football Crossover episode. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. That is Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer of Locked On UCLA Bruins. And this episode on this glorious, wonderful Wednesday is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Guess what? If you place your first $5 bet, you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. This is, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's talk Ducks and Bruins here, Zach. It's not the high-stakes Rose Bowl game that Oregon fans enjoy playing in the most or hope to be playing in later this season, but it is a game. Oregon didn't have one of those last week. UCLA did. We'll talk about that. We'll talk key position groups, key players, and all that good jazz. But if Oregon plays, particularly with its offensive line, as they did against Oregon State, I think you could see a lot of similarities here. Final score of that game was 49-14. I think that's how this one could end up.
Yeah, UCLA hasn't had a sack in 3 weeks. They haven't had a sack since week one. So pressure has been an issue. Depth has been an issue on the D-line. If Oregon just doesn't run into each other, what was that weird thing they did a couple weeks ago? They ran into each other, let the fourth and short get stopped. What was it, against Idaho?
Oh, yeah, the old power handoff where an offensive lineman gets beat, one offensive lineman stumbles, the fullback runs into the offensive lineman who got beat. That wasn't a good play. The good news is in the Oregon State game, the offensive line has come a long way since then.
If this isn't an episode of College Football Follies, then I think Oregon should be just fine unless some of the guys UCLA has been waiting to get active play extremely well. If the Oregon offensive line is just like capable, they should handle the D-line for UCLA just fine.
Yeah, the Bruins lost the Murphy brothers and Latu, who is a beast. He's a beast playing for the Colts. He had a strip sack over the weekend, and the Bruins
against Caleb Williams. You have to say who it is. Against Caleb
Williams. That's true. Against Caleb Williams. It wouldn't be a college football show if Zach, host of Locked On UCLA, didn't take an opportunity to just little poke at Caleb Williams and the Trojans, who UCLA beat last year, of course, and then ran our old friend Chip Kelly out of town. He's the OC at Ohio State. But Deshaun Foster, through the first few weeks, it hasn't been good so far, Zach. It's why Oregon is capable of winning this game big. I don't think UCLA can win this football game. Our friends at FanDuel have got this as a 24.5 point line in favor of the Ducks on the road, meaning they think Oregon is a significantly better team, which they are. You've got a better quarterback. You've got better trench play. You have better skill position players, though I like a couple of UCLA's wideouts, and we'll talk about them on the show. But what are your early impressions of Deshaun Foster so far? Because from a distance, I thought the LSU game was quite good. The games that came before that, yee.
I mean, I was joking with the Locked On Hoosiers host in the Big Ten squad episode that's going to be coming up soon. Indiana better than LSU? It kind of looked like it the way that one team thrashed the Bruins, and LSU I thought was overrated but still very good. It came down to UCLA just can't compete on the offensive and defensive lines. One you expected, right? All the talent went and left UCLA defensively, right? Whether it's going to USC with Danton Land, going to the NFL ranks, exhausting the college eligibility. That was kind of expected. Defense would be a problem. But they had some guys returning the O-line, and you thought with a big name hire like Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator, things would be clicking. And it just hasn't looked so good consistently. Yes, they looked a little bit better when you don't drop the first play action RPO, whatever it is, against Indiana, right? When they just don't drop the ball, then that's a problem. And a big problem is every single game, the opponent's first drive has ended in a touchdown. That's not a good way to play winning complementary football.
No, it certainly is not. And that Indiana game was really, really bad. And I look at that and say, oh, Oregon can do that, 42-13. Yeah, I think they're a much better team than the Hoosiers, who could be better than I thought they were coming into the season. They've been very impressive so far. But then I watched the UCLA game, Zach, against LSU, and I was going, it's tied at the half? It's 17. This is in Death Valley. I thought LSU would steamroll the Bruins. They went on a 17-0 run in the second half, so it wasn't close at the end of it. LSU's talent eventually, bore itself out. And that could certainly happen to Oregon here. We saw them play down to Boise State's level, and Boise State's a good team. We saw them play down to Idaho's level. Like that's something this Oregon team is very capable of doing. Did anything click, you felt, for UCLA last week against the Tigers?
When they just don't shoot themselves in the foot offensively, they can actually move the ball. Like the worst play I've ever seen for UCLA this season, I don't know if you caught it, it was when they were down a touchdown late in the game. UCLA ran for a first down. They had it like 1st and 10 at the LSU 15, down a score. They call it back, do it a chop block. So it's 1st and 15, gets to a 2nd and 20. And then they do this weird reverse play, and they fumble it 30 yards backwards, college football follies. And it was one of the weirdest, stupidest plays I've ever seen in like an Eric Bieniemy called offense. And that was just maybe one of the 3 dumb things. Garbers had a weird interception that he threw. It was at the end of the game, but it was a poor decision like he's had a couple of this year. He fumbled the ball when he gets hit. So it looks like they're getting better. And if they can keep Garbers upright, he can move, he can throw. They can do things offensively. They have the talent. He just doesn't have the time to do so. And there is some talent on defense. It's just if you have the quarterback giving him 30 minutes to throw, they're going to complete it every time it's 3rd and 8.
Do you think Deshaun Foster is in over his head right now and still trying to find his way as a head coach? Because he's never even been a coordinator before. He's now running a Big Ten program. And like the LSU game felt like a big step in the right direction. But the first 2 games could have, I'm sure Rainbow Warriors fans would say should have, lost to Hawaii. And then you don't just lose to Indiana at home. You get boat raced at home. Where do you feel like he's at as a head coach right now?
It's, if you go by post-game pressers, well, UCLA isn't winning those, or pre-game pressers.
Or preseason pressers, perhaps.
Yeah, I watched some of his interviews beforehand. I knew he wasn't a talker. I was like, oh, this is a coach who's not going to come and win you with a war. He's not going to be Kurt Cignetti of the Indiana Hoosiers, right? We're going to some old whatever stadium to kick somebody's butt. That's not the type of guy he is. But for whatever reason, when he was hired, the entire team embraced him. So he is connecting, which it can't be said the same thing for Chip Kelly. While he could do the X's and O's better, the team could probably run a better offense, have better numbers with similar players to last year than they're doing right now. I think there's a greater connection from coach to players, but it just has not translated from the staff to the players figure it out through 4 weeks. They're still a little sloppy. So yes, he looks a little in over his head when you ask him a question and he's trying to figure out how to game plan different things. But I thought against LSU, all right, 4th and 2 at midfield, let's put him back inside the 10. Punt executed, and decisions are getting better. It's just I'm not sure they're executing or they have the talent overall to beat these teams on the road in Death Valley. I think that's where we'll see over the end of the time if he can change that gap in recruiting in years to come.
Coming up, we're going to ask Zach a question about this particular matchup, and we're going to get to the position groups that will define this game. That's coming up next on this crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Bruins. It's time to highlight my Roy Player of the Week. Roy is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android. Enter referral code LOCKEDON. You'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Oregon was on a bye this past week. But if you look at the UCLA Bruins, you'd have to look at Ethan Garbers, who we're going to talk about later in today's show. Did a lot of really good things against LSU last week and made some really good throws that Oregon has to be on watch for. So that's the Roy Player of the Week. You can give money directly to Ethan Garbers if you want to support him. If you were impressed, as we were with his performance last week, you can show him some love. Just hop on Roy, throw in a few bucks. If everyone pitches in just $10, it adds up fast for guys like Ethan Garbers or anybody else who you want to support, so you can continue supporting players in your favorite program, get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with Roy. And then once you do that, you should, of course, go check out LinkedIn Jobs, because that's the best place to hire. When you're hiring for your small business, you want quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional when you go on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, last question on the team picture here, Zach. What do you think is the best case outcome for UCLA? I cannot see them winning this football game. I really can't. I think Oregon found out how to fix a lot of their issues against Oregon State. They've had more time to address that in the bye week. Matthew Bedford injured, of course, but he wasn't there against Oregon State, not on the starting offensive line unit. So I think my concerns are lessened there with him still not being back. And I think UCLA can make this an uncomfortable Saturday night, for very late night, for Duck fans, but I don't think they can pull a big upset here.
I think it's going to take Oregon playing like they're playing against Idaho, UCLA playing like they played against LSU, and this game could maybe be 2 to 3 quarters long, right? UCLA, they impressed me coming out and playing well against LSU, playing better than we expected, and LSU playing a little bit worse. Obviously, it won't be very hot. It won't be a quiet crowd. They'll be at the Rose Bowl, so it'll be a different type of quiet crowd we might expect. But I think the idea is, I've talked about small victories, right? UCLA went from, all right, let's get a touchdown to 2 touchdowns in a single game. That's how simplified the idea was. They need to improve. Now it's
that is a sad statement to make.
That was. And
Go
that was
from
Hawaii,
1 touchdown to 2.
Hawaii and Indiana were those 2 games they couldn't score 2 touchdowns in a game against. It was 2 touchdowns combined. But I digress. We move on. What's the next thing? Playing a clean football game. That means no turnovers for the first time all season, and limited penalties. Let the other team make mistakes. And Oregon has looked sloppy at times this year, which means maybe UCLA could drag this game into a fourth quarter, make it interesting, and maybe the skills and the depth of the Ducks may prevail. I think that would be a win for UCLA, making it, as you mentioned, more comfortable into a fourth quarter than it looked like against LSU the week prior.
By the way, are you sliding like progressively towards your right? I'm sorry, everybody, but as you were talking, you were like getting closer and closer to the edge. Like you just didn't want to have to talk about the football game anymore. Like, I'm just gonna slide over here and get out of this show. Anyway, let's talk about a couple position group battles that are going to be big in this game. I like UCLA's wide receivers. J. Michael Sturdivant, that's a good football player. Logan Loya, that's a good football player. Oregon fans probably remember Maliki Matavau at tight end. Really solid football player. There's another tight end who you probably know off the top of your head who has had some nice moments this year as well. Keegan Jones at running back. He was there when Oregon played UCLA last at Autzen Stadium in 2022. He had the long touchdown reception and outran Justin Flo to the sideline. So I think there are some skill position pieces. We'll talk about Ethan Garbers later, but it's the wide receiving core that I think provides the biggest test for this Oregon defense. You know, I was talking with Mike Jorgensen of the Oregon Sports Network on yesterday's episode of Locked On Ducks, and I asked him what the biggest area of improvement he thinks is, and he was wondering about the safeties. Like, how capable are they in pass coverage? Tysheem Johnson struggled with that aspect of his game in the deep third of the field a season ago. Kobe Savage from Kansas State, you know, little known more as kind of an in-the-box sort of guy. So if Eric Bieniemy can get wide receivers onto these Oregon safeties, I think that's the most advantageous situation. Now, the problem is how deep does that UCLA receiving core go? Do they have 3 or 4 guys to where you get one-on-one with a safety? Because if you're putting a receiver up against any one of Jabbar Muhammad or Nico Reed has played awesome, or Dante Manning or Brandon Johnson, I feel good there. But if you get him challenging Tysheem Johnson or Kobe Savage, I think that's an untested part of this Oregon defense.
Well, let me tell you something. You're listing off all the UCLA receivers. You didn't even mention the number 1 receiver. And hear it, Rico Flores Jr. That's the Notre Dame transfer who leads the team largely in part from the 100-yard game against Hawaii, but he's still a threat. He actually was listed on the depth chart ahead of Logan Loya. So UCLA's leading receiver last year started the season as number 2 on the depth chart. That changed after, he scored a touchdown against LSU at the end of the first half. And freshman Quasi Gilmer, not sure if you saw his commitment video, did the LeBron James type commitment video when he committed to UCLA. He made a spectacular catch and actually was one of the leading UCLA receivers at LSU as a true freshman in Death Valley. So I think this receiving corps is deep. They were without Titus Mokia Atumalala, a starter. So they went deep into the receiver room. And they are very
That was an impressive name rattle off. That was some work right there. There was not a hiccup. There was not a hitch or a slurred pronunciation syllable. That was flawless.
You should have heard it when they did the Hawaii broadcast because his brother plays for Hawaii and they kept calling him Titus, which is not his brother's name. They mixed the brothers up, but that's a whole other story.
Oopsie
but the
daisies.
UCLA room is really deep at the receivers. My question to you, Spencer, is how solid do you think this Oregon defensive line will play against what's been a very sluggish UCLA offensive line? If Garbers has time to throw, he will find any of these wideouts, maybe not all the time, but he will find them during the game. Does he have time?
Yeah. I hear you. And I love this Oregon defensive line. I think they've posed the fewest questions of any position group on the Oregon defense. If you're talking safeties, corners, linebackers, defensive line, I think both the edge guys and the interior unit have been really, really good. Derek Harmon is, according to Pro Football Focus and according to every Oregon fan that's watched him play this year, is one of the most disruptive interior defensive linemen in all of college football. He has been fantastic, but the depth that Oregon has, it has been chock full over the last couple of seasons in the recruiting world for Dan Lanning and company with blue chip kids and high level transfers. And that's what they have loaded up this year. I think this is the best Oregon defensive line since the 2014 unit that had DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead. Now, does this unit have a high-end top 10 NFL draft pick talent the way that one had 2? No, I do think the depth on this line is crazy good. I mean, Jordan Birch, former 5-star recruit and one-time South Carolina Gamecock, who definitely has NFL potential, he has not been at the center of what Oregon has done this year along the defensive line. And he's still a really good player. He's been disruptive, generating quarterback pressures. I think he's been really good. But there are just so many guys. They're not rotating quite as much as they did a season ago. But this UCLA offensive line has to play well, or Ethan Garbers is going to be in trouble. And that's what I wanted to get to next, is Ethan Garbers is a capable quarterback. Oregon saw him 3 years ago. He's been a lifelong Bruin, it feels like, at this point. He came in when DTR got hurt late in the game. Bruins were coming back. College game day was in town, and DJ James picked off Garbers on the sideline. He's improved since then. He doesn't look as much like a freshman. When he makes throws, as he did last week against LSU, you see why he was a 4-star quarterback recruit. You're like, oh, well, that guy looks good. Like that was a big time throw. He throws a very tight spiral, a really catchable football, and when he has time to throw, he's great. But the moment you get him off his spot, that's when I think he struggles.
He is not what I think the Chip Kelly offense needed last year, right? We saw the dynamic offense that it was with DTR Charbonnet.
Yeah.
Then you could see over the year why Garbers won the job in 23. And then also why Chip wasn't so excited to have Garbers and Dante Moore, as you Ducks fans know. None of them were really ready, but Moore throws the better ball, except Garbers was more ready mentally, leading-wise, and just had a little better presence on the field to get smacked in the face from a poor offensive line in front of him. He's not the best. There's no stating he's not the best. I wanted to believe before the year he'd be a upper half of the Big Ten quarterbacks, which of an 18-team league, as crazy as that sounds,
it's not a great quarterback league.
It's not. So I figured that's not a bad statement. Top 9, I thought he could be higher up. The numbers haven't backed it up. I think he just played one of his better games of the year, and he's had an interception in all 3 games. It's about decision making. Now, I will kind of give him a little bit of slack and just be like, all right, that last interception against LSU, you're down 14 in the fourth quarter, 3rd and long. He's just kind of throwing a prayer. If he doesn't get that off, you're punting, right? Or they're going to go for it 4th and 15. So that was probably one forced play, but it's for him holding on to the football. He fumbled it. messed up another play, fumbled it in week 3 against Indiana. It's decision-making with him. You don't want to say that for a redshirt senior, but he does have a decent enough ball, but his deep ball is not the most accurate from what I've seen. Dante threw a better deep ball. Beautiful. But I think Garbers has more moxie in the pocket to get blasted if the Oregon defensive line just breaks through every time.
We've still got one more segment to do on this Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On UCLA. And that segment is individual players we think are going to shine for our respective sides. And, well, I'm going back to a guy who I did just mention but want to talk more about. That is coming up next. First, let's talk about FanDuel. Why? They're the best. America's #1 sportsbook, in fact. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Plus, if you want college football action, it's there. It's there. Everything is there. Oregon, UCLA is there. Oregon's favored by 24.5. If you're a Bruins fan, you think, well, that's ridiculous. UCLA just played really well. They're taking steps forward. They're coming back home. They're going to cover 24.5. FanDuel.com. That's where you can go. If you're an Oregon fan and you think, oh, Oregon has figured it out, they're going to blow the doors off of the lowly Bruins. FanDuel.com. Again, that's where you can go to figure it out. You'll get started with $200. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So just go check them out. FanDuel.com. That's where you go. FanDuel.com for America's #1 sportsbook. Zach, let's wrap up with some individual standouts, and I'll start because I mentioned him earlier. This UCLA offensive line hasn't been amazing. Derek Harmon has, and I think Derek Harmon is going to have a monster game. It might not show up in the stat sheet. He might not have 3 sacks and 2 other TFLs. I think Derek Harmon has been the most disruptive player for Oregon defensively this year since transferring in from Michigan State. I think he keeps that rolling here. He's fresh off the bye week. UCLA did not have a bye week ago. They were in Baton Rouge, crashing and banging with the Tigers and whatnot in what was a good competitive football game. But that's the first guy that I look at and say, boy, he could be in for a monster day. I wouldn't be surprised if he's got multiple sacks, multiple TFLs, or if he's just making life uncomfortable for Ethan Garbers in the pocket.
I would say for UCLA, he's probably not going to dominate the game, but I think his effectiveness can set the tone. Jay Tuia, right? This is a guy who was in the portal. Deshaun Foster and the Bruins, they decided to bring him back. They got the NIL, offered him. He was going to Texas, right? And maybe life would be better if he was at Texas for him personally. But he comes back to UCLA to be the man. This is a D-line that's a bit banged up, doesn't have the talent it has last year. Former Duck, right? Keanu Williams, he's out for the year. That was announced this week. He didn't even play in the LSU game. There's a few transfers for UCLA in the D-line that have not played. I'm not sure that's going to make up for the lack of ability to rush the passer, but I would think Jay Tuia is someone who can set the tone for the Bruins if they're going to make some noise defensively. He might not blow up the stat sheet, but I think his ability to clog up the middle could be important for UCLA in this one.
There's been a strange connection roster-wise between these two programs. You, of course, have the Dante Moore factor where he flips from Oregon to UCLA and then transfers to Oregon this past offseason. But UCLA's got Maliki Matavao, Keanu Williams. I was this close to saying Keanu Reeves. This close. I was right. Right. I was right there, and I saved it at the last moment.
The big question Davies, is which Keanu Reeves movie comes out of your head?
Oh, John
first?
Wick. Okay. John Wick, 100%. Any of them. Like, pick anyone. I love the most recent one. I thought it was fantastic. But Jalen Davies, former Oregon cornerback once upon a time, also still in that UCLA secondary, who was also there the last time these teams played in 2022. But I want to go to that position group because Dylan Gabriel has been phenomenal this year. He's completing over 80% of his passes. I don't think that holds up over the course of 12 games, but certainly I said coming into the year he should be at least a 70% completion guy. He looks well on his way. He's spreading the ball around like Rajon Rondo and the OG Boston Celtics, who were a great NBA 2K team back in 2K10. I think that he is doing such a great job of reading what the defense is giving him and taking it while also being able to push the ball down the field. And sometimes it's Trayshawn Holden, sometimes it's Evan Stewart, sometimes it's Tez Johnson. How do you feel about UCLA secondary? Because I look at this game and say, this can happen any week, but Tez Johnson feels like he's got a 9-catch, 120-yard, 2-touchdown game in him.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you got multiple guys who could be starting for UCLA in the secondary, former Oregon Duck players. Another DB just went down for the year, Kanye Clark for UCLA. So you got 2 defensive starters for UCLA out for the year announced this week by the head coach. And so that's a unit that doesn't have a lot of depth. It's banged up. And I think all you have to do is go look at the tape from Nussmeier from LSU. Started off a little sluggish, but then he took what was given in front of him, right? Maybe like a Dylan Gabriel, although throws it from the right side. And then when he threw an excellent deep ball, beat a UCLA DB down the field. And if UCLA generates no pressure, regardless if I'm going to say I have my UCLA bias on, and I don't think this defense is as bad as the numbers say. I don't believe they are, but they can't rush the passer. I can't even say passer, right? But passing, here we go. If you're
I wasn't going to say anything, but like that was the second time.
Yeah. But if Dylan Gabriel's given as much time to throw, the secondary is on an island. Like it's happened this way every time. 3rd and long for Curtis Rourke in Indiana, for Nussmeier. All this time to throw, even Shager at times in the run and shoot. I do believe in the DBs, but they can't stand there for more than 5 to 6 seconds time and time again. If Oregon's offensive line doesn't run into each other 13 times in a row, I just don't think they'll hold up over the course of the game, especially when it comes to 3rd and long. UCLA is the worst in the country, I'm pretty sure, if not one of the worst, at defending 3rd downs and the conversion rates. They're one of the worst defenses because they can't rush the quarterback and give him any pressure. So 3rd and 8 is a comfortable down, regardless of who's throwing the football.
Dylan Gabriel against Oregon State was supremely comfortable. And he was, wait for it, really, really good. If UCLA cannot get pressure on Dylan Gabriel, Bruins fans will probably get tired of watching the southpaw spin it, and he can really throw a nice tight spiral, deliverable, and catchable football. I think that he's been sensational this year, and his best game, I don't think it was the Idaho game necessarily. He's 41 of 49 for 380 and 2 touchdowns, but it was a lot of short passes, and he didn't look fully settled in. But he got settled against Oregon State because he had the time to throw. And I think Oregon, especially with the Matthew Bedford injury that he aggravated during the bye week, that was the Indiana transfer at offensive guard. Oregon's going to have the same starting offensive line as they did against Oregon State. I can't see them changing that. It'll be Connerly, it will be Strother, it will be Poncho, it will be Harper, and it'll be Cornelius from left to right. And that unit did not allow Gabriel to get sacked and ran for 7.5 yards a carry. And I want to close with this. Oregon's offense is at its best over the last couple of years when it's balanced and they can do a little play action, but when they can get Jordan James involved. We saw Dylan Gabriel break a big run against Oregon State on a speed option play. What's the state of this UCLA defensive line and the linebacking unit as well to stop the run? Because that's another way that Oregon can make this a really long game, is they could control the ball and control the tempo of the game in any way that they want.
If UCLA can't penetrate the Oregon O-line, that will tell the story. You'll know the first couple of drives. If Oregon has as much time to throw, just dominate the trenches, if they can do what they want as well, it'd be brutal. The linebacking unit, UCLA has the most depth in the linebacker room. They did miss longtime Bruin, former Alabama Crimson Tide member of a national championship team in Ale Cajo. He didn't play, but he's been injured almost his entire career, so you can't rely on his injury status. So that's like 3 or 4 starters UCLA's been down on defense this last week. I don't think that makes a difference whether they beat LSU or not, let alone Indiana. But they're getting beat up. Linebacker, Kay Madrano, he's a stud, right? Femi Oladejo from Cal. You've got guys who have been there and made plays. I'm very confident with the linebackers. They just get beat up. This team does when it comes to the O-line and the D-line. And if Oregon controls those, regardless of if Garbers has the best Heisman moments, regardless of if the DB makes the craziest...
Ethan Garbers and Heisman. I didn't know you could put those things in the same sentence.
I can. Let me go with Travis Hunter-like DB one-handed interception if UCLA's corners takes a play. But again, it's repeatability and consistency. And the lines have not had that this year. So I can look at the secondary, the talent, the skill positions. UCLA, maybe not 1 through 10 all the way down the depth chart, but they have talent there. It's what they've been lacking and what all the Big Ten media has been saying. these teams can't handle the strength other than Oregon. And it's led up to what UCLA struggled with this year.
Zach, do you have a score prediction? I don't. I'm going to save that for my Friday show, but if you've got one, you may drop one. I'm not going to force you to, but if you got a vibe, go for it. I think we both like Oregon to win the game. It's just a matter of what score.
I think the question is how many quarters goes by before people might turn it off or think it's not competitive. I think we can get this game into the third quarter thinking it's competitive. How deep in the third quarter and how big that lead is, it's one thing. I think the Bruins can put in two quarters and make this fun. Score, any Oregon team, it seems like it can be close and then you're losing by 30, right? It can happen in a blink of an eye, and I think that can happen in this one as well.
Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer, Locked On UCLA. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. This has been a Locked On College Crossover. We'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.